Hi guys, welcome back. We left off on page 27. We're in the middle of chapter 2. And when we left off, Jane was having a conversation with William, and he was explaining that his plan is to move west to Oregon country. Oregon wasn't a state yet. The Oregon area was just called Oregon Territory because it wasn't yet a state of the United States. So he wants to move out there because land is, very cheap. And that's kind of his only chance of ever having a future because he won't inherit anything from his family. So we'll continue. The day was warm and Miss Hepplewhite's soothing voice rose comfortingly in the room. She was teaching us Chapter 8, or Dress as a Test of Character. Your true character is shown in your dress, girls, she said. A young lady should have neat habits, she explained. This meant wearing a pressed dress. Pressed means ironed. A tidy bonnet. A bonnet was a hat. Fresh petticoats. Petticoats were the extra skirts that you wore under your skirt to make your dress poof out really far. And stockings. Stockings would be like socks, like high socks. And clean gloves. Most important of all were the clean gloves. A real lady never went without clean gloves. Furthermore, a proper young lady must strive always to be appropriately dressed, Miss Hepplewhite said, eyeing our outfits as she walked up and down the rows. Papa had recently bought me some clothes, and I was wearing my new ensemble. A pale blue silk dress with a puff of muslin about the wrists, a new bonnet, and matching gloves. I liked it very much, but it was nothing compared to what Sally Biddle was wearing. As usual, Sally was wearing a dress of the very latest fashion. It was pink and white organdy with layers of scallops, flounces of lace ringing the skirt and caught up in small bouquets. She had added a straw bonnet trimmed with white flowers and thickly fringed white parasol with more flowers. Parasol was like those little umbrellas that they would wear that weren't waterproof. They weren't for rain, but they were just to shade you from the sun. So it's just like lace and flowers just everywhere, like this massive outfit. With all the flounces and flowers, she greatly resembled an iced cake. Everyone agreed that Sally Biddle was the best-dressed girl in the class, and she knew it. Sally Biddle sat up straighter as Miss Hepplewhite passed a small, confident smile on her face. But Miss Hepplewhite continued down the row and, to my amazement, paused next to me. Miss Peck is a sterling example. She is wearing a simple, tasteful frock as she has taken the time to match her bonnet and her gloves to it. The most elaborate dresses rarely produce the best effect. Simple outfits with thoughtful details such as muslin about the wrists are always in good taste because they allow one's true beauty to be perceived. Sally Biddle seemed to stiffen. Those are lovely gloves, Miss Hepplewhite smiled approvingly. Well done, Miss Peck. I glowed at her praise. It was the first real praise Miss Hepplewhite had ever given me. The girls sitting around me dutifully murmured soft compliments. Sally Biddle and some of the other girls lingered in the hall after class. I paused to listen to what they were discussing. So basically, Miss Hepplewhite just dissed Sally Biddle because Sally Biddle thinks she's the best. She passes by and pretty much compliments Jane for having a simple outfit, which is kind of putting down Sally Biddle for having like an overdone outfit just for school. All right. It requires more than new gloves to be a part of society. Wouldn't you agree, Cora? Sally asked conversationally. Oh, yes, Cora agreed emphatically. After all, they let just anyone buy gloves. I looked down at my new gloves, a hot, sick feeling rising in my throat. Sally's eyes slid to mine. Why, even my maid wears gloves, but that doesn't mean I'd ask her to tea. Except perhaps to serve it, Cora squealed. I pushed past Sally before the tears spilled out. Her soft laugh followed me. I rushed down the cobblestone streets, my stomach one thick knot of shame, my eyes clouded with tears. And of course, at that most fortuitous moment, I tripped on a fresh pad of manure, my feet going out from underneath me. I fell to my knees, stopping my fall with my gloved hands. As I picked myself up, people stopped and stared. I ran the rest of the way home, crying in earnest. So she tripped and fell in manure. So her white, brand new gloves, bam. She put her hands down when she fell, so she has manure. Manure is cow poop or horse poop. It's animal poop. "Miss Peck, whatever's the matter?" a voice said. It was William. Hastily, I wiped my eyes. "I'll never be a part of society," I hiccuped. William pulled out a handkerchief, a pocket handkerchief, and pressed it into my hand. I blew my nose hard, as if I could blow away all the horrible things that had happened today. "Now tell me why you'll never be a part of society," he said. "My gloves," I said, holding out my soiled hands. "Your gloves?" he asked in a perplexed voice, recoiling slightly. They did smell awful. "I thought that if I looked like a proper young lady, I would be one. But Sally Biddle said that just because you wear nice gloves, it doesn't mean you're part of society. What if she's right? What if I never fit in?" William was silent for a moment, as if deep in thought. Finally, he said, "Jane, we are alike, you and I. It is only through our own cleverness and hard work that we will succeed. You must not allow impotence to stand in your way. You must reach for what you desire, for it will never be freely given to you. Do you understand?" "I think so," I said finally. William looked thoughtful. "I imagine the Sally Biddle is simply jealous of you." "Jealous of me?" "One of my younger sisters, Elizabeth, who is your age, had a similar problem with a girl like your Miss Biddle. Do you know what she did?" "What?" "Beth ignored her, and after a time, the girl stopped taunting her." He patted my hand. "Perhaps you should ignore Miss Biddle." And I know that's always the advice, right? Ignore. But it does work. Let's see if it works for her. The next morning, Sally Biddle was in the hallway with Cora Fletcher and some other girls waiting for class to begin. "Keeping your gloves clean, Jane?" Sally asked brightly. "I understand Jane had a slight mishap on the way home yesterday," she explained helpfully to her audience. The other girls looked expectantly at me. I started to feel that familiar sick feeling in my belly. But then I remembered William's good advice. I tugged up my gloves, looked straight ahead, and walked right by her and into the classroom. "Well done," a girl seated in front of me whispered in an admiring voice. I could not resist a peek behind me. Sally Biddle was still standing there, staring after me like a dog who had its bone taken away. So dogs like to play and toy and bite on their bone. So that's kind of, it's a good piece of figurative language. So if Jane were Sally's bone, she likes to mess with her and toy with her, and that got taken away. So it did kind of work. Miss Hepplewhite had said that thinking and sewing, chapter 6, was a useful exercise, especially when one was worried or upset. And that was exactly what I was going to do. For in spite of having successfully ignored Sally Biddle, I had new worries, specifically my waist. An ideal young lady, Miss Hepplewhite had stressed, should have a slender waist, sunken cheekbones, and a pale face. Should look, in fact, as if she were on the verge of fainting. Can you imagine me telling all of you that you should, make yourself so skinny sick that you are sickly? Sunken cheekbones is what happens when people are, starving. It's where the cheekbones start to show because skin is just hanging. And on the verge of fainting, that's what the teacher's encouraging. No, not good. I might have been plump. I had never considered myself fat. Now I spent hours in front of the mirror worrying that perhaps Mrs. Parker's cherry pies had something to do with the way my skirt pulled tight against my belly. "You just have stout bones, Janie," Papa said, and although he was a surgeon and qualified to give an anatomical opinion, I knew he was only being kind. There was no escaping it. I was simply enormous. And that was the very reason I was sewing so furiously. I needed to keep my hands busy so that they wouldn't reach out for Mrs. Parker's cherry pie, waiting on the table, piping hot from the oven and smelling so tempting. Papa and William were eating it right across the room from me. I could almost taste the warm golden crust, the sweet cherries, and the thick cream dribbled over it. My stomach growled loudly, as if it too knew that Mrs. Parker's cherry pie was in the vicinity. Papa raised a questioning eyebrow, and I looked down quickly. My fingers moved faster over the piece of embroidery. I was sewing a small red cherry, and I tried not to think of the way the cherries would ooze out of the pastry, tasting sweet and warm. Sewing was the one thing that Miss Hepplewhite didn't have to teach me. Papa had taught me how to sew years ago. so you can help me stitch up cracked skulls, he said. Certainly is quiet in the living with a young lady, Papa said, looking over at me, a little sadly it seemed. I would have responded that a lady was supposed to be quiet, but I was feeling very short of breath. I had just put on my new corset, and it was giving me considerable trouble. Trouble in particular with breathing. And remember, we had talked about this in Fever, how the corset was that piece of material that they would put around their waist to make it small, and it had whalebone sewn into it, so it would suck everything in, and it was very dangerous. It caused crushed organs, punctured lungs. It was not healthy. So here she is having trouble breathing because she's wearing this thing. The corset was reinforced with whalebone stays, and it had taken Mrs. Parker the better part of an hour to secure it tightly at my waist. Now it felt as if a million fingers were poking into my middle. I could barely breathe. But what other option did I have? I would never have a waist as slender and ladylike as Sally Biddle's unless I did something about it. Still, I couldn't help but stare longingly at the half-embroidered cherry, imagining it peeking from a piece of flaky crust. Why anyone would choose to be a lady is beyond me, Papa said, addressing no one in particular. It wasn't much of a choice, unless you like letting your brain rot and your tongue drop out from lack of good use. I gave a ragged breath, wincing at the tightness in my middle. A thought suddenly occurred to me. This is what it must have felt like to be one of Papa's patients and be sat on by a fat little girl. No wonder they always behaved afterward. Why are you fidgeting so? Papa demanded. You look like you're being tortured, girl. I wanted to say that I was being tortured, but wisely said nothing. Papa had a very poor opinion of corsets, and it had only been by begging Mrs. Parker that I had managed to secure one. Well, he asked again. I'm fine, I said. You're not wearing one of those corsets, are you, Janie? He asked suspiciously. There's nothing fashionable about crushed organs. Papa, I hissed. What was Papa thinking to discuss such things in William's presence? Humph, he said. Papa, I need some money, I said, eager to change the subject. Do you now? I need to buy ribbons for my bonnet. Miss Hepplewhite says that dress is a test of character, and all the girls at Miss Hepplewhite's have ribbons on their bonnets. Papa snorted. What have ribbons got to do with character? Besides, I just bought you 3 new dresses, 2 parasols, a cloak, and 2 pairs of shoes, not to mention 4 pairs of gloves. 4 pairs! That's quite enough, I think, for one small girl who can't be bothered to speak her mind at the supper table. But Papa, I pleaded, all the girls have ribbons. Then you'll be the only ribbonless girl in Philadelphia. I'm sure you'll survive. But there is more to life than amassing a wardrobe. When was the last time you picked up a book? He shook his head. I did not raise you to be a vain and shallow girl. But Papa... No, Janie, he said firmly, and I don't want to hear another word. The next afternoon, William was waiting for me when I returned home from the Young Ladies' Academy. For you, he said, placing a small paper-wrapped packet in my hand. I looked at him in astonishment. Go on, he said with a beautiful smile. Have I mentioned he had all his teeth? Open it. My hands trembled as I unwrapped the paper. I gasped when I saw what was inside. Beautiful green silk ribbons, more than a dozen, enough to decorate several bonnets. They're beautiful, I whispered. I had never received a more precious gift in my whole life. Papa usually gave me boring gifts, never anything as wonderful and as important as ribbons. He nodded. I'll treasure them, I said earnestly. They'll look lovely on my new bonnet. Yes, William said. A bonnet is just the thing to tame that hair of yours. I nodded, patting my wild hair. What a good idea. Green suits you, Jane, he said. You should always wear green. I shall, I solemnly vowed. And if you notice on the cover of the book, she's wearing green. It seemed that no time passed at all, but months disappeared, and suddenly William's tenure with Papa was at an end. William announced his intentions at supper one dark winter evening. A crisp wind, promising snowy days ahead, drifted through the crack of an open window. I looked out a window, imagining William and me strolling down the snow-covered street, my hand resting lightly on his arm, his eyes smiling down at me. I have secured passage as a surgeon on a clipper ship bound for San Francisco, William said, beaming. The Sea Witch. I sat up abruptly. You're leaving? I asked in a stunned voice. When? Tomorrow. We leave on the tide. Tomorrow? I echoed dully. I remembered all his talk about wanting to go west, but still, how could he leave me? Papa looked equally surprised, but quickly gathered his wits. Congratulations, that's a fine post. You'll get plenty of experience. It's a way to get west, William shrugged. I plan to head north and settle on Shoalwater Bay in Oregon country. The government is offering land grants to settlers. There can't be many pioneers out there, Papa said curiously. Who will you treat? I could not believe that Papa was capable of asking such questions. Why didn't he ask if William would stay on? He needed William as much as I. Didn't he? William inclined his head. I shall minister to whatever pioneers are there, but I am interested in the land and the timber on it. It is my intention to make my fortune in timber. Timber would be the trees, so chopping down trees and shipping that lumber was a way to make money. They didn't have a lot of lumber left in England and the East Coast, New York. They had all chopped down their trees, so there was a lot of money behind timber. Papa looked taken aback. All that study to become a surgeon, and you want to chop down trees? Papa asked in a shocked voice. There's more money to be had in chopping down trees than chopping off limbs, William replied coolly. Papa grunted. You'll have to move a few Indians to get to the land. The savages shall be obliged to move, William said, completely unconcerned. Hard way to make a fortune, if you ask me, Papa said, full of danger. William pursed his lips. I have nothing to lose. Except life and limb, Papa said dryly. I coughed loudly, trying to get Papa's attention. You getting sick, Janie? He asked. I stared at Papa mutinously. Why didn't he say something to make William stay? Why was he letting him leave? Papa turned back to William, raising his glass in a toast. Good luck to you, especially with the Indians, Papa said. I suspect that'll be harder than doctoring in timber. He sounded amused. I put my glass to my lips but could not swallow, nor could I eat another bite. All I could do was sit silently at my place and glare at Papa and William, furious at both heartless men. They were impossible. Could they not see I was dying inside? After supper, I went to William's room. He was packing his leather satchel. I stood watching in the doorway. His maps were already stowed away, as were the books that he had littered at his desk. There was not a single personal possession in sight. It was as if he had never even been here. Must you go? I whispered, reaching out to put a hand on his arm. He turned around, startled. I'm afraid I must, he said, regarding me with his gray eyes. When would I see those eyes again, or those lovely eyelashes for that matter? But you can't leave, I said helplessly. What will I do? If you write to me, it will be as if I am still here, he said easily. No, it won't, I wanted to shout. A letter would never listen to me, or give me advice on Sally Biddle, or bring me ribbons. Will you promise to write to me, he asked. I promise, I said fervently. You're a good girl, Jane Peck, he said, and kissed my hand lightly. He was gone the next morning. So you could see she's a little upset. That is the end of chapter 2, and that's where we will stop for today. To be continued.